Hello, class. This is your Tiny Desk presentation for this week. We're going to talk about conflict management, COM 340, and we're on the week where we're looking at interests and goals. And really, we're looking for the things in by goals, like what are the problems and what are we looking for as the solutions that we're trying to get to. And interests, meaning what's our focus? What are we pulling out of the conflict that has grabbed our attention and we are trying to resolve an issue? So these are more tools for your toolbox, and goals and interests kind of is entwined with all sorts of information. And I want to start with taking a break, which is Gottman Institute that talks about when we are flooded. So I'm using the word flooded, which means that we have an amygdala hijack, meaning whatever is coming at us, we are in the amygdala part of the brain that is kind of our reptilian part of our brain. That's the fight, flight, or freeze part, or freeze and then decide to fight or flight. Is usually kind of how we roll as we're trying to take in information. We often freeze first. And fight or flight, if we're in a flooded state, that means we're getting flooded with adrenaline, cortisol, other hormones are being activated to pull us into action. And some of that action is to fight or run. Run or fight. Who are you? You might be both, actually. It depends on the situation. It always depends. Let's just say it always depends on context and relationship dimension, the situation, the background, each individual's different experiences and context that they're bringing to the communication event. All of these things impact, are we a runner or are we going to stay and go? Let's go at it kind of thing. And even within that, there is different kind of manifestations of how they show up. We've already gone over Gottman Institute's four horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And so we've already covered that, and we're going to keep wanting to cycle those words in as we start unpacking and deconstructing conflicts even further. So, confession time. I'm a runner. I definitely am someone. In fact, I was just tested on this. If I wasn't sure, a little over a month ago, I also ended up in a situation. And because I was under a lot of stress, I lost uh, I lost my ability to kind of move into a more reasoning or emotionally regulating state. But that doesn't mean that I blow up or anything like that. I'm not one of those. Instead, I just leave. I'm just gonna go. I'll see y'all later. I'm gonna go hide under my bed and cry for a few days, right? That's like my kind of amygdala hijack reaction when I get really flooded in a situation by those hormones. But not everyone's like that, and it will depend on, when I say the relationship dimension, it depends on how much power you perceive you have or influence that you perceive you have, if you're willing to engage or exit. And it also will depend on the context of the situation, meaning how are you able to get to your goals with this particular person, or how much are they engaged as a listener, and do they how it depends. It's just going to depend. So let's say the person who's a runner, we're going to call them the exiter, and the person who wants to keep engaging in the conflict or the difficult conversation, we're going to call them a fuser. And this is not gender specific behavior. It's really, I would say, power influences that decision a lot more than gender, though we do see trends with different genders, but I think those are social constructions of expectations of a binary gender division of act like a man or act like a lady that it sometimes influences uh, how we react when we are emotionally flooded. So gender can show up that way as well. But what ends up happening when you're a fuser is you want to move into the conversation. You want to go back over things. And not always, but sometimes when people are in the fusing mode, they usually have the mic, right? I've got the microphone. It's my turn to talk, everybody. And they don't want to let go of it, usually. Usually a person who's in a fusing mode isn't sharing the microphone. It's not a dialogue. Uh, and they may not even realize it's happening. This is very unconscious, but they're basically going into this mode of summarizing, where I'm going to go over what the happened, what led up to it, the moment of injury, whatever it is the conflict is about. And the other person who wishes they were more in a dialogue but isn't being included, their perspective isn't being included, there's no ability for them to gather their thoughts or create flow of what their point is, that they will start to do anything to shut down this conversation. So they'll agree. Yes, you're right. Okay. And strangely, if the person agrees with a fuser, it does this strange thing where it's like pushing the rewind button. They go right back to the beginning and go over the story again. And you agree, and they rewind and they go back to the beginning, and they end up in this cycle of summarizing, which Gottman calls summarizing. And that it can be really, if you're the other person in the conversation, listening again and again and again, most people don't realize they're in a summarizing mode when they're doing it. That's part of the amygdala hijack. That's part of the flooding experiences. We get this disconnect from our frontal reasoning cortex parts of our brain, and we move into this reptilian brain activity. So the other person will start stonewalling. And there's lots of reasons for stonewalling, but this definitely starts showing up where they're going to exit. Whether they're physically gone or not, they're gone. Parents who've had to try and explain things to kids, kids fall into that stonewalling where they're really not listening anymore, which only enrages the parent and makes them want to go over it again and again and again, the more the other person stonewalls and stonewalls. And then, of course, if you have the power to actually physically leave the situation, like me, I'm going to do that if I can. I'm a runner. Then that will activate another response from our fuser to try and follow, to move in this place of following, either to physically follow or to call, right? We're going to call again and again and again, or text and text and text, or go on social media. And, or if they now, with all different kinds of electronic ways to track people and things like that, they're checking the find my blank map, right? So they're doing all these different searches and they're trying to follow, whether it's digitally or physically. And both people, whether they're an exiter or a fuser, both people are what we would say in physical pain. This is a very stressful, painful place to be in. Uh, I don't have to explain it to you. You're a human being alive on the planet. I'm sure you've felt this feeling. It's not fun, even for people who enjoy engaging in debate or in or they like the feeling of getting into the weeds on a topic and going back and forth. Again, that might be different than what I'm talking about, though it has some similarities. So we end up in like this infinity loop. The more in the complementary conflict styles of fuser and of exiter and fuser, where the more someone tries to fuse, the more the other person exits, which activates the fuser to want to fuse, which activates the exiter to exit, that activates the fuse. Right, okay, I don't have to keep going. You get the idea. We're going to be going through that. And that means that it's really hard to get out of this cycle and move back to what were we talking about anyway? I mean, there's still a problem on the table that needs to be addressed. But when we are in a really polarizing conflict or monologuing instead of dialoguing, we get into flooded states. And it depends from person to person, the types of homes we grew up in, how engaged were we in conflict situations as through growing up or past relationships that we felt disempowered in? We might bring that pattern to a new relationship. There's all different things. Sometimes it's not always the person we're with. I remember when I first was with my husband, he had a lot of conflict with his first wife, and I would be trying to enter into a dialogue, and he would immediately go into a reaction that was not mirroring what I felt like the conflict was. So he was bringing this other pattern to this new relationship. And then I was bringing my old patterns from my first marriage into the relationship. And between the two of us, we had some work to do. And that took a lot of patience. It took a lot of meta communication and step by step, getting through these really tough, painful dialogue experiences to the point where we did the work. We got through the work enough so that we can now enter a conflict in a very different way. Of course, we're 10 years into our marriage at this point, and been together longer than that. So those of you who are uh, have had previous relationships that are difficult and you're in a new relationship, like it's really good to meta communicate what the issues were that ended that other relationship so you can basically call out your own patterns and have someone on the same side or the same team as you. So what do we do about this break? Sometimes we need to take a break. Exiters who need to exit, they need to exit. That's their self-soothe. If it's done right, they're doing self-soothing and they're finding ways to come back into the conversation in a more emotionally regulated space to actually dialogue about whatever the issue is. But that kind of leaves your fusers on the hook because their need for engagement is their way of self-soothing. And both need to find ways to manage if you're in an infinity loop that's just making the situation worse. And we don't want an exiter to exit in a weaponized way, like as a tool to be aggressive or harm the other party in the relationship. If we are in a conflict situation, we need to think about how we're using these tools as way to open up pathways to help each other through the moment, not not use the tool in the wrong way to harm each other. So my exiter needs to exit, and what Gottman says is you need to exit with the promise of return. So there needs to be some meta communication statement or an agreement that you make before even you get into a conflict, when it's roses and unicorns and lollipops. That's a great time to engage in, hey, this is my conflict style, and I never want to, but when I get upset, I need some space. Uh, so one of the things I'll do, and then you create a dialogue of agreement of how to handle a painful moment. I'm thinking, I think Gottman recommends 3 hours maximum at this point to return. And you may not even need that much. Some people, they just need to take a walk around the block, and that gets their heart rate lowered. They're able to stabilize and move back into the conversation. Some people need a few more hours. I don't think it necessarily is 3 or it doesn't, each couple needs to decide for themselves. The fuser in an active dialogue of problem solving to allow the exiter to exit, but remembering their own needs of being able to be included in it. That needs to be figured out between the parties involved in the conflict. And then once, if you made that agreement when it's sunny as sunny weather, and then a conflict hits and you use it, then I would say to always return back and say, when things are better again, how did that go? What could we change? What worked? What didn't work? Because remember, conflict is inevitable. We're in interdependent relationships. This means that we need to really engage in these meta statements or these meta dialogues. Okay. So our exiter is going to agree to leave, or is going to leave with an agreement to return and give the time of the return. I'll be back after dinner tonight, or I'll be back before dinner, or I'll be back in an hour, or I just need to walk around the block. I'll be right back, whatever it is. But there's also like, it's good to just have some transparency with that. Now, my fuser, fusers, hang in there with me. I know it's tough, but you've got to let your exiter go. You just have to. There's lots of reasons why we need to get them in a place where they can listen, because remember, our stonewallers shut down on listening. It's not good for their physical health to have that cortisol and adrenaline rushing through them, but not having any active ability to contribute to a dialogue. So that's why anything that includes movement or is a good way to get that cortisol moving through your system so it doesn't build up in toxic ways in your body. So this is really about your physical health. But fusers, you're going to be left alone. Okay, so let's have a plan. You're left alone. What's the plan? And I would have an emergency plan because boy, it pretty much feels like you're falling off a cliff. Exiters, it is so physically difficult to be left alone, which is why they get disconnected from the reasoning and start blowing up everything digitally or through other communication channels. So just like an emergency plan that you might have for other types of natural disasters, let's have an emergency plan for a fuser when someone exits. What will you be doing? Can you engage in a physical activity like going for a walk, or can you, if you have any equipment at home, like lift weights for a minute or go just up and down the stairs of your townhouse, whatever you need to do, anything that you can move your body. And what's that doing is that is helping move your adrenaline and cortisol through your body so you can start lowering your heart rate and move from the flooded state back into a reasoning place. Some people like to do journaling and writing. Some people meditate and do breathing exercises. A breathing exercise you can do, and you can do this in the middle of a conversation to keep regulating your emotions. We'll talk more about breathing. This is one that I've heard Huberman talk about and other people who deal with neuroscience to understand how to get your brain back on track. There's dragon breathing, where you change which nostril you're breathing out of and holding it. Hold. Right? You can look up dragon breathing on YouTube and see if you can find someone doing it. The other one is this one where you do a big breath through the nose and you hold it, but then you do another small breath. So it's, and then as slowly as possible, exhale. You can do that subtly in the middle of a dialogue, and it will help you immensely with starting to take control of your heart rate and that adrenaline coming through you. And here's just a little tip. If you find yourself in a conflict situation where you're not allowed to exit, you don't have the power in the room, if there's a way that you can just say, oh, I need a glass of water, or I need a cup of tea, anything to create some movement, to stand up and do something. Or if you can say, I have to go to the bathroom. And even if you're just gone for 1 minute, you can do a breathing exercise to get yourself more regulated, to get back in the dialogue. And those are like little emergency hacks. I bet you guys can think of some. Can you think of any that you've done where you've really been able to help yourself when you didn't have a power in a situation and you needed to get yourself emotionally regulated to continue through that situation? Or maybe you did have the power and you needed to stay emotionally regulated. Boy, I'd love to hear all those stories. Everyone's experience is so individual that even though I'm talking about calm theory or conflict management theory, we want to think about theory as a box. I've said it in previous videos. I'm back to theory as a box, and life doesn't always fit in the box. You don't fit in a box. What theory really does is it shows us these patterns, and they created a lot of evidential proof of repetition and patterns and that happen. And then we can use that to deconstruct and apply to our situation. But we also need to remember that not everything fits in the box. So we have to adapt it and be flexible as well. That's why I like hearing from you, because I study a lot of this theory, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert on life. Maybe some of you have some experiences that can help expand our perspective. That's why also in your worksheets that are due every week, I do ask for that journal or reflection piece for you to process, bringing the information to the class and all the vocabulary with your own experience and finding that bridge. Okay, so taking a break when there's complementary conflict styles of exiter and fuser, and we covered the terms of being flooded, exiter, fuser, taking a break, creating an agreement for that, and finding ways to self-soothe that match you. Whether you're the fuser or the exiter, you both have to have the job of doing self-soothing so you can get back to, what is the conflict about again? All right. So we definitely know some of the top conflicts are usually money and time and others. Those are big topics for conflict. But there's also other things that we lean into, and that's why this week is about goals. So when we have a conflict situation, what we want to do, actually, where are my notes? I feel like I had some notes here that were really helpful. Okay, I'll just talk without my notes. Uh, so this week we look at goals. When we talk about a goal, we're really talking about what is the best chance that we have to collaborate to get to a win-win. And a win-win means that we are including other perspectives. Everyone is engaged in solving the problem together. Next week's lecture about the TKI model, I'll go into a lot more depth on the win-win approach, that pure conflict that Martin Deutsch talked about. So going into your conflicts, can you identify what is the goal of it? We want to acknowledge the issue right away, and that's usually the topic goal. So when you're dialoguing, you want to acknowledge the issue. Thank you to all my previous students for lots of examples of roommate conflicts. I am so appreciative of them, from cleanliness, hygiene, to noise, sound, money, issues with food, right? All of these things that come up when you have to share space. So we always want to acknowledge the topic, but then we want to also, even though we might come with a solution, we want to engage in the dialogue in a way so that the other person can build a solution. Your solution only includes one perspective, which is why when we talked about perception checking, you want to, that's a tool for expanding the dialogue so that you can include the other party or parties. The relational goal is our goal for the relationship itself, which might also need to be acknowledged. Like, I really am glad you're my roommate. I don't want to lose this relationship. It's worked. I've really enjoyed being that you're my roommate and that we have a lot of shared interests. Like, acknowledge the relationship piece that you're trying to maintain. That's why we want to engage in conflict, for benefits for our relationship to grow. So this relational goal is really substance to understanding that we are interdependent. Basically, we want to say we are interdependent. Your actions will affect me, and my actions affect you. So let's talk about that. We're interdependent with a lot of different people in the world, strangers, people we never met. But if we're actually able to be in dialogue about the causal effects of someone's behavior or actions on us, or listen to what our actions or behavior might have a causal effect on someone else, we want to know that just to maintain that relationship goal of friendship, roommates, romantic relationships, family, uh, and having trust and credibility, right, for each other, which actually is starting to lead right in. It's like a Venn diagram. We just have all these overlapping areas. So relationship goals often overlap with these other ones. And this brings us to identity goals. Identity goals are the way that we wish we present ourselves to be perceived. And our identity is often dependent on the way someone accepts our presentation of self. It doesn't mean that if someone doesn't accept us, we aren't who we are. But if we're going to try and stabilize a relationship or another situation, our identity goals sometimes start to come up to the surface as a primary issue if it becomes an obstacle that you are not accepting me as I want to be presented. And we have to move into a private, or there's our private self and our presenting self. And these things are a negotiation that we are often in a tension with, that can be a conflict within itself. One of the things about identity goals is often a conflict won't start off as an identity goal. It starts off as a topic goal. I just want to make sure the dishes are in the dishwasher every night. And so when I come in from work, I can start the dishwasher. and I don't have to spend a bunch of time loading it from everyone's dishes all day. I don't mind starting the dishwasher. I don't mind unloading the clean dishes, but can you at least get your dish right? Okay, whatever the issue is. Uh, we might start with that, but if someone accepts that as a personality criticism and moves into defensiveness and then attack, often the attack comes at the other person in just the right way to hit a note that makes us move into defensiveness, or in a way that changes the topic completely. And we're no longer talking about what I need the dishes in the dishwasher. We're talking now about, oh, remember that one time when we were living in that one apartment and we had that we didn't have a drop zone and you dropped your stuff, you were putting your stuff all over the house without any like, and it took you never, I asked you to pick up stuff all the time and you never did. Okay. Now all of a sudden I have to talk about something that was resolved in the past. It's not even a current situation. And if I feel personally attacked, then I'm going to move into identity repair, face work and face repair that I would need to do. And often people who are very cunning with conflicts, uh, or, or are masters at kind of manipulating the conversation, they will say just the right thing to make the topic about something else, the difficult conversation, and pull someone else into a totally different issue uh, instead of discussing the issue that was brought up. And if that happens, it's really good to be cognizant and practice what you might say, like acknowledge it. Yeah, that's right. I used to do that. And I remember we had to talk about it and we came up with a solution. And if you need to talk about it some more, we can, but, and then segue and say, but today the issue is whether the dishes are being put in the dishwasher. And I agree, I've had some issues in the past, but I really just want to talk about this one today. And then we could go back and address that one later. So that's like a tactic you can use, like acknowledge responsibility and think about the sequence of time and get us back into this moment of what we need to resolve to get through this conversation today. So that's another thing. I have to tell you, I am horrible at that. I am the worst. Here I am trying to help you with these tools. But when I do that, oh, it's so hard for me to have agency and know how to speak up for myself. I really struggle with that, even through all the different things that I've had. I'm really good at speaking up for other people and advocating for them. But then as soon as I have to advocate for myself, I've really struggled. That's why I like Esther Perel and Brené Brown and Gottman and some of our more uh, current people who are studying how to manage stress so that we can so I can find ways that I can work on this for myself. The last type of goal is the process goal. The process goal is the process we're going to talk, and meaning how are we going to resolve this conflict? Now, I think I've talked about this a little bit in another lecture, but what I'm talking about are how you're establishing the rules and the norms and the expectations before entering a dialogue. And then if something comes up, how flexible are we at integrating the unexpected or the unknown through the process? And a process goal for this needs to be negotiated often and it needs to be reminded of. And I'm struggling a little with how to say it, but here's an example that when we have third-party people come into a conflict situation, one of the first things they're going to do is establish norms and process. That means that they are going to identify the expectations right up front from all the different parties involved. And then they're going to look for common ground and they're going to negotiate those norms and process. And depending on the situation, from stakeholder meetings in communities to workplace and groups, group communication to romantic relationships. The truth is, this is not an easy thing to negotiate always. Everyone has different perceptions or expectations about this. I would say for some, this can take weeks, months, or even longer to establish the process and negotiate that process of how we're going to deal with conflict. And it always needs to be revisited, just like I just mentioned with the break. That's a process goal. I'm going to take a break when things, and I promise to return. This is what I'm going to do while you're gone. And then we go into action. But then once it's all, and we come back together, we talk about it. Then when it's resolved, how did that work? We're going to go back to the process and reset our expectations. The truth is, when this is going really well and why you want to spend a lot of time on process goals is because after a while, when you're working with the same group of people or you're in a long-term relationship with someone, what happens is when conflict shows up, if you establish these process goals properly, it almost doesn't feel like you're in a conflict. It just sounds like you're having another conversation, even if you are disagreeing, even if you have different ideas about what the problem is or what the solution is, because you've developed this idea of what is our dialogue process, all of a sudden you stop having to engage in these escalating techniques that you've used in the past to be heard, right? If we're escalating, it's often because we don't feel heard, whether that's verbal or through nonverbals, through volume or by stonewalling, whatever it is, those escalation processes are often because we haven't been heard or we don't feel acknowledged or that no one's taking responsibility. So that's why I say make sure you're acknowledging and taking responsibility for yourself so we can start mirroring that and really leaning into accepting influence. Because I'd love for you to be in a place where conflict is transformative. When we get to a transformative conflict, that's really the win-win-win of a peer conflict where you have two people on the same team, solving the same problem, using each other's differences and different strengths to move towards a solution that works for everybody. And we didn't need to even compromise, which is lose-lose. I'll talk about that next week. Let's put a pin in it. Next week, we'll come at compromise with full force. We want to move past that to collaboration. Another thing about when we talk about interests and goals is to really think about everyone has all these, there's all different tools that we're exploring and they don't work for every single situation. I might be presenting a tool that works for you and your romantic partner. That might be one place, but then you realize I use that tool really effectively in that context and that relationship, but it does not work with my coworkers. And I need to go back to the toolbox we're learning in this class and find a different tool for what happens in my coworker conflicts. So that's what I mean about really thinking about each of these steps we're going through in the class so you can start really developing an understanding of them so you know which one to pull out to move through a situation with a little more cognizant awareness and self-awareness and to find ways to be as regulated as you can. And when we become dysregulated, we want to start finding those ways to take care of how we handle stress so that we can move in back to a regulated place uh, as quickly as we can, because it really does affect our overall health if we live in these conflict places of stress and dysregulation for too much of our lives. So I hope this helped this week. I look forward to your worksheets. Bye, everyone.